imagine all life as you know it stopping instantaneously and every molecule in your body exploding at the speed of light.
Total protonic reversal.
Protonic reversal.
Protonic Reversal with your host, Conan Neutron. Broadcasting from a secret underground lair in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
A gigantic middle finger to everything that is rock, about music, rock and roll, and corporate power.
The thing is, though, if you don't laugh, you're going to go on a killing spree with sharp nails.
Confidence of a hero or a fool. I wasn't exactly certain which.
Could not be more professional.
It's only one I choose to devote my life to. That's okay.
It means something. It means something.
And take that away.
You know, that's my take on it. What's yours?
Protonic Reversal!
That's like a science thing, right?
Indeed it is. It is a science thing. It is a science place. It is a scientific fact that we are all up in your face. It is time once again for the one, the only, Protonic Reversal. Welcome to it, welcome to it, welcome to it. A very special guest for you today. We don't often have we have lots of rockers on this show, but we don't often have rockers that have taken quite a career turn as my guest today. Of course, you probably know him from the astoundingly great Girls Against Boys, perhaps Soulside, even Fake Names. But did you know this dude knows books, man? This is Johnny Temple. Mr. Johnny Temple, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Do you get that a lot? Do you get a lot of, because there isn't a lot of rocker to book complex folks out there. I just don't know of many people that have started, at least with the aplomb and vigor that you have with Akashic Books, that turn specifically. How did that come to pass? Can we start with that? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. And I don't think, I will say, I don't think it's incredibly unusual in that like musicians are big readers generally, more so than the general population. Because when I started publishing books, when I was still like what Girls Against Boys was still going full time. It was like the mid 90s. And we got a bit, like we had been putting out records on Touch and Go and in Chicago. And then we got a whole bunch of interest from the major labels, and they all descended on us at once. We were at the right place at the right time, exactly the right number of years and months after Nirvana broke big. And so we got caught in like a bidding war, which was great. Not everything about it was great. There was a lot about it that was not great. But the point being, to answer your question, we signed a good record deal. And for the first time in my life, I had disposable income. I started what I always wanted to do was start a record label. So I did that with my friends, Bobby Sullivan and Mark Sullivan, Akashic Records. And then it kind of evolved into a book publishing company without really ever planning to. And then we sort of took the ball and ran with it. And along the way, Bobby and Mark both became parents. And when it was a money losing operation, they couldn't afford to stick around. But people would say to me in the early days, yeah, it's so unusual, like a rock dude starting a book publishing company. And people would say, like, you know, does anyone else in your band even read? And I always thought that was so ignorant. You know, it's like you take a music.
Yeah, like you're an illiterate because you play in a rock band. I mean, come on.
Yeah, we're more literate. Rock and rollers, jazz musicians, hip hop artists, classical musicians. Yeah. You know, high life. Those musicians are all more literate than the rest of you. You know.
Right. Exactly. It's an absurd thing built by years of framing. You know, through mass media, the only appreciable music narratives allowed are behind the music, and you know, things like Almost Famous, where you have these like separate pronouns, basically. Yes, why not? Sure. And did you have any like, were you thinking of things like Black Sparrow or anything along those lines? Were you thinking of like your more strong ethos kind of label like identity to them, as far as you know, you a name you can trust and recognize that, like, hey, this is going to be
Yeah, no, and it's good. I mean, that's astute for you to mention Black Sparrow, because they were hugely inspirational. And what was interesting is that at that time there was like a million little record labels doing good work. A lot of them, not all of them, there weren't that many book publishing companies. There was like 12 indie book publishing companies. Now there's like thousands and thousands,
really?
which is which is a good thing, because it reflects, the technology progressing in such a way that you don't need to be rich to publish a book anymore, which is kind of good. But anyway, there weren't that many indie publishers, but I was totally inspired by them. And Black Sparrow, the way they would print their covers on that uncoated matte uncoated stock, I just loved. So the first 3 Akashic books had that. We weren't imitating their typography or their compositions, but just using the that uncoated stock, which we still use occasionally. I love that. I love that tactile paper stock.
Yeah, in its way, it's like it was as unique in presentation and style as almost like the Chicago Fireproof Press and Company style record covers of just having the tactile feel, the look, like, and again, almost the indie record label style identity that like you can kind of look at it and be like, oh, I bet I know who published that. And exactly.
And you see their logo, you see the Black Sparrow logo. I mean, my tastes have changed enough that that's maybe no longer currently what I'm, so I'm not, they publish great books, high quality, really excellent publishing company.
Well, and I guess that's something too that, like, the indie publishing world is going to be different than like the music world, and the mechanisms are different, and how people get involved in it are different. Why people even do it are going to be different. But it strikes me that, and as you mentioned, there are more indie publishers now. But at the time you were doing it, did you feel like there was anybody kind of in the game, so to speak, that was doing the kind of thing you were wanting to do, or is that one of the reasons why you made it in the first place?
Yeah, no, I mean, Henry Rollins was doing 21361, his publishing company, which I believe still exists to this day. But along the way, they went, I think it started as a sort of avenue for Henry to publish his own work, perhaps. I don't actually know the story, but I know that it grew. And then he was publishing writers like Hubert Selby and other great writers. And then at some point he shrunk it back down to just, I think, doing his own work again. But when he was in the middle of the period of doing really literary, strong literary work. I mean, Henry's own writing is strong literary work, but by multiple writers. That was when I was starting up, and I think I reached out to Henry, who I knew just a little bit, and he was super helpful, and he told his staff to like help me
figure out.
Gave me some like crucial contact information. This is Publishers Weekly. Here's how you get in touch with them. You got to make sure they get your books. And I didn't know anything. What I did know was like how music worked in the music business. I didn't know it inside out, but I've been playing in bands, and at this point been recorded with bands on both like independent and major record labels. So I had a good sense of, the business of culture or whatever. But anyway, Henry Rollins, 21361, and his crew were incredibly helpful to me. And what I was trying to do wasn't all that different than what they were doing. I mean, quite honestly, Again, my tastes maybe run a little bit different, but in terms of the style and the ethos and the approach was like, still you could look at what 21361 was doing then and see a lot of Akashic. To me, Discord Records was like always a core inspiration. So it's like a Discord Records with some 21361 thrown in, and Black Sparrow and Norton and other great independent companies that continue to inspire me.
Well, I was going to make the analogy of like Discord to Touch and Go or something along those lines, being that, that both labels had some similar operating ethos, but working in slightly different different terrain and territory. And I think that's fascinating. And also just a point of fact and just a comment that I would not have known about Hubert Silver Jr. if not for Henry Rollins. Flat out.
That's fucking incredible. That is so cool. That's awesome. I hope Henry hears you say that. I mean, because that's just real. That's why we publish. It's like, it's like, to me, publishing is also like a little bit like the core impulse. I wanted to do a record label, which is what I originally wanted to do. I never dreamed of doing a book publishing company, but because there were no publishers at the time, there was a demand for it. So when we experimented with it, it was really fulfilling because we weren't being redundant with, but I think the core impulse is like to be the DJ. Like to me, it's like, I want to be spinning the records that everybody is dancing to. That is sort of my core impulse to publish books,
Well, and it, it seems like it comes from an honest fandom too, of be like, hey, have you read, the such and, oh man,
exactly.
I think you would really like this. Here's all the reasons.
This will blow you away. This is incredible. This will rock your world and turn it upside down.
What things did you learn from the music world, like the record making world, in the indie and major label worlds that actually did translate over to the book world?
I mean, a lot, so much. It's like, I'd say like the book business is like 50% overlap with the music business. It's like half of it is very similar, and then the other half is more peculiar to books. But my point being, there's so much that transfers over. I would hardly know where to begin answering that question, because it's, bookstores are like, they're very similar to record stores. So the distribution, one of the things, it's almost more interesting, the differences, but because
I was just going to think you could also do the differences as well, because, even down to like, which are the most pain in the ass things to move, records and books. If you're moving from one house to another, it's like, those are the most pain in the ass, but they're also the most, I'm speaking personally, and probably to a lot of listeners to the show, those are going to be the most important things too. What about the differences? The differences between that, like, what were the big, most surprising differences in the book world that you were like, oh, didn't see that coming? Okay. Yeah.
Well, the on a negative pain in the ass level is this issue of bookstore returns. When you're a book publisher and you ship out, 1,000 books, copies of a new book out to bookstores and stuff, on average, this is changing, but as of a few years ago, on average, a third of those books are going to come back to you. And you may continue selling books so that, then you sell through those books that came back, but you often may not, because books are very hard to sell. And so a high percentage of the books that you ship out come back. For the big successes that you have, in my publishing company, we've had a lot of great successes, had a lot of books where that's not really a problem, but it is always there, an ebb and a flow. And for the books that don't quite find an audience, you kind of get hammered with returns. Now, I've been doing this for over 20 years. It's now just part of how I do business. It doesn't surprise me so much, but then that was kind of an early surprise. And then on the positive side about books was, there's less social hierarchy in the book world than there is in the music world. And that was one of the things that I liked about it, is I found music, not just rock and roll, but other musical genres and stuff, to be just socially hierarchical. And it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not, I'm not saying it was like the bane of my existence, but it is something that I appreciate about books. Books are a little bit more anonymous, like for popular music, rock and roll music, hip hop, but, popular music, it's like 60% art, 40% style, or whatever, whatever band you are. Like a band like Fugazi is like 95% art, or 98% or whatever, every band is different, but in books, that percentage is very different. And it also makes books less exciting, because in music, you have a whole bunch of people being super performative and showboating with massive egos that they're trying to brandish in like crazy iconoclastic ways, often very successfully, and that's what we love, is the insanity, and like the out of control ego kind of can play better if it's successful, maybe in the music world. It can also be horrible. But anyway, it's like it's all toned down in the book world for better and for worse. But in terms of, to me, I appreciated it a lot coming out of like a hefty rock and roll period when the Girls Against Boys putting out a bunch of records, and then seeing what it was like being on a major label and the sort of unfortunate cynicism that comes with that. Books to me were a breath of fresh air.
Well, and it almost seems like, okay, so you could have your authors that there's a certain force to the words. There's a certain force to what's being presented within the book itself. To the fact you could sit there and make analogies like, okay, like, Cubby Selby Jr. would be, he'd be the Stooges, right? Sure. Okay. He's and you could make all sorts of analogies, but it's not quite going to hit the same because it's not a performance in that same way. So, I mean, do you find that, do book folk seem more introverted, do you think? Or is it just, does it hit differently as far as...
It's just it's I don't think it's introverted. It's just less dynamic. That's an ungenerous thing to say, but it's just that there's a lot more personality. I find that the personalities among my musician friends are a little bit more, their personalities are like a little bit more defined and amped up.
Sure.
And I wouldn't say just people in the book world, but people in general. But the book world it's a little bit staid, it's a little bit bourgeois. It's a little bit highly educated, and not completely. The book world is big and it encompasses different, but it skews kind of like, it skews wealthy. There's many people that are not wealthy and that don't come from wealthy backgrounds, but the culture of it is a little highly educated for my tastes, even though I'm pretty well educated, but it makes me cringe to think about like trying to make art, for prosperous people. Which as a publisher I do to a large extent, but I couldn't be comfortable if I wasn't also trying to sell books to, across the socioeconomic spectrum, et cetera.
So has there been any challenges, and I'm going to hammer this because I think it's kind of interesting. Have there been any challenges with kind of making it more equitable for folks to invite people in that maybe wouldn't be thinking about buying books because they're going to leave it to like Netflix and whatever, and and that's about the end of it for their entertainment. I mean, it's there. It seems like there's a think piece article every couple of years about like, no one's reading anymore, and this and that and the other, and certainly there are more distractions. There's more entertainment options, things along those lines. Is it something that you kind of actually have to sort of push to find new audiences, or do you even bother thinking about that because that way lies madness?
No, I mean, we're always looking for existing readers, but also new readers, and trying to pull people towards books. Netflix is really, very fun to watch, and there. But I'm less concerned than a lot of people in the business about no one reads anymore. I kind of don't believe it. People, definitely reading habits have changed, and definitely, like, probably studies can show that perhaps you could say that reading has declined, but that's like the book publishing world needs to be like reaching out to the whole population just for its own survival to remain relevant. But I don't feel like books are on the precipice of becoming irrelevant or anything like that. But there are constantly challenges. It's a tough business. It's a really tough business. But I like the idea of trying to find new readers and trying to develop new readers. We publish books for kids. We publish picture books for tiny children. We publish middle grade and young adult books. And so that's one of the things that we do and we publish, just like the rest of our list, those children's books are very like culturally diverse. That's always been core to our mission. We publish a lot of African-American writers, Caribbean writers, writers from the African diaspora, writers African writers. That's always been core to what we do. And we also participate a lot in public book fairs and book festivals, which I think is a great way to pull people towards books, because you have authors speaking, authors of various backgrounds and with different genres, science fiction authors, horror authors, poets, nonfiction authors, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Brooklyn Book Festival, and it's super diverse. And there's, whether you're young or you're old, or you're an atheist or you're a Muslim, that there's, the book festival, it's our mission to show you how exciting books are, regardless what your background is.
Well, and there's going to be a certain amount of dynamicism towards seeing someone read too. That maybe it's going to allow people to find an interest or connect with something that they're unfamiliar with based upon the presentation of just seeing the author, read a selection, like, oh, that sounded interesting, I want to know more about that. And that's, it's a brave new world for a lot of things. And again, the, are people done with reading seems to be the same type of editorial malpractice that happens with the "is rock dead" / rock and roll is back that you see every, I think we're down to 3-year cycles at this point, but
yeah,
nothing new under the sun as far as that goes. So I guess, and then I think we could just talk about the bookstore forever. The one thing I want to bring up is there an assumption for people that only know you from rock and roll that it's all rock and roll autobiographies and like rock and roll books or something?
I don't really come across that too much. I see what you're saying. And, but what's interesting is that, it's almost the opposite. It isn't the opposite, but I'll try to say this quickly. When I started publishing books, as I referenced a little bit a few moments ago, to me, it was a breath of fresh air away from the music business. So when I started publishing books, I specifically did not want to publish music books. I was not interested in that. I had enough music and I was still a full-time musician. So I wasn't running away from music. I just, in the musician part of my life, and I was playing in like 2 bands. So I had enough music. I didn't also need to run a music business. Like that was way too much, And so it was like our first 10 years, we published almost no music themed books. Now we publish a fair number of music themed books. Right. But in the early days, I guess I had encountered people who assumed it would be music related, and I'd be like, nothing. I got nothing for you, but now we do. We do great books with musicians. We're Ziggy Marley's publisher, among others. We did books with Prodigy, who's deceased, but from the hip hop group Mobb Deep, we got all sorts. Les Claypool. We do lots of books with cool musicians.
Was it almost important to you to define your identity first before doing that, or was it just sort of like, enough with the music? I got that around me all the rest of my life already. I'm just not thinking about that.
It was more about getting away from the music. It wasn't so much about defining my identity, because I did use my music media connections from being in a band that had gotten good media coverage. Right. So I knew music journalists who are super literate people, obviously, and people like Matt Deal and Michael Azerrad, and people that I was just sort of friends with and were supportive of my book publishing habit. Danny Goldberg was like a music industry veteran, managed Nirvana, and he was super supportive. So it's always been very intertwined for me.
So well, thank you so much for speaking with. I've had a few folks on that are in the book world and in and out of maybe, and I do think it's interesting. I think that it's also interesting where things overlap and where they don't. I do want to talk a bit about music too, not the least of which is Girls Against Boys, which to me is one of Girls Against Boys walked a fine beam, which is to say that you came from very much the indie rock world, And again, you mentioned the the substance, like Fugazi, 95% substance formula, but you didn't have a like the defined aesthetic seemed to be very strong from the get-go. And I'm just kind of interested in how did Girls Against Boys as a band originally come together? So Soulside already existed, if I remember correctly. My history might be a little hazy here. When Girls Against Boys got together, did you have any ideas other than, hey, we're going to get together and we're going to play this music and we'll see what it sounds like? Like what was the plan, if any?
It was definitely, there was no plan. And in fact, if you listen to the very first Girls Against Boys releases, the 90s versus 80s EP, and then Tropic of Scorpio, which was the first album, both of which were released on Jeff Nelson's Adult Swim record label, before later being reissued by Drastic Plastic. But the original Girls Against Boys recording was actually Eli from Girls Against Boys and Brendan Canty, who, great musician and including drummer of Fugazi. And Eli and Brendan, in the sort of late Soulside years, Eli was becoming a studio wizard. And so he and Brendan, I think, were just like basically fucking around in the studio, making, kind of like almost like electronic beats. And this would have been like, 1989, maybe even 1988. And so they were just messing around. And then I think they invited Scott in to lay down like a vocal track. Mm-hmm. And so I could have this wrong, but I think it was like Eli and Brendan, and then they pulled in Scott, and they recorded these like kind of like dancey type, industrial. This is the A side of the record 90s versus 80s. This is the 80s, actually. This is quite literally the 80s and the 90s versus 80s. And so, and then Eli invited like Scott and then me and Alexis in to do more like rock, like something, but with an additional like sort of sample element to it, because the stuff with Brendan had been, sort of like electronic drumsy. So I think Eli's idea was to try to find some sort of, to do more recordings, but maybe make these ones a little bit more rock. And so that became the 3 90s songs that we recorded in, I think, 1990. I think the first 3 were in 89, and then the other 3. And
they actually were 90s versus 80s then. That's funny.
Yes, it was 90s versus 80s. And
that's awesome.
And then after that, we started, like, we liked what happened with those 3 songs, the 90s songs. And Eli, it wasn't like Eli and Brendan had any ambition. They were just literally just fucking around in the studio. I don't think they were trying to make a record or anything like that. But so, and so Eli was happy with these 6 songs, and then he actually put it out himself. He made a 12-inch. The original 90s versus 80s is on Slate Records.
Oh, wow.
Was Eli's, I believe it was Eli's record label, and there may not have ever been another release on Slate Records. And then when we started to make more music that would eventually become Tropic of Scorpio, I think then that's when Jeff Nelson wanted to reissue it on Adult Swim. Yeah. So that was how it started. And then Scott moved up, was living in New York already. Then Alexis moved up, then I moved up, and we started making music. So it was, and then Eli came up last.
That's interesting. So did the proximity, did that sort of change the aesthetic at all? Like when did you have the idea that this might be like not like a one and done kind of situation, but that, hey, we got something here, let's keep it going?
I don't remember exactly how it went down, but me, Scott, and Alexis had a band between Soulside and Girls Against Boys, which was called Little Baby Sound System Sound Force. And it was, or Little Baby for short.
Oh yeah.
But Little Baby is important to know its full name. And that was me, Scott, Alexis, and Mike Fellows, who had played bass in Rites of Spring and Happy Go Licky. Mike Fellows played guitar in Little Baby and sang. Mike Fellows was the lead singer and played guitar. Scott McCloud played guitar and also sang. And I played bass and Alexis played drums. And so we did that band in New York. And then that band kind of fell apart. And then I think Scott, Alexis, and I must have just sort of like kept playing. And then we were like, oh, maybe we should, maybe there's that Girls Against Boys record that Eli's putting out. Maybe we should, I don't know exactly how it happened, but then Girls Against Boys kind of started going. Yeah. That's the chronology.
And then, and of course that's, for folks that don't know, the Tropic Scorpio, it's kind of like the band kind of sounds like you're still trying to find exactly what you're doing, right? But there's some great moments, also some great titles,
but it's it's definitely, in terms of what Girls Against Boys, the band that we ended up being, Venus Luxure #1 Baby, our first touch and go record, is the first one after we had found what we were looking for. Tropic of Scorpio and 90s versus 80s are both very much like experimental music, in a way, like with a punk music, but experimental music too. And Girls Against Boys became like a rock band, a punk, post-punk, whatever you want to call it, noise rock.
I can't let us move away from the earliest days without mentioning how much I love the song title. Everything I Do Seems to Cost Me $20. I've referenced that many times in my.
It does need to be updated, though.
It's gonna say that almost seems quaint now, but
yeah.
Bit of a theme song back in the day. Let's put it that way. So Venus Luxure #1, you got. That's Ted Nicely did that one, is that correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you've got songs like In Like Flynn, like you have your thing down, like you've got it, like you've got like a sound, you've got everyone, it kind of seems like from the outside at least everyone was on the same page, kind of moving towards a similar goal. Did it feel any different on the inside than it did from any other bands? Not Little Baby, Soulside, et cetera, et cetera. Did it feel like there was maybe the ability to like go a little further, do a little more with that one?
No, no, we were just more mature, so we didn't break up when we got mad at each other.
It's important. You can't do cool things if you don't stick around,
I honestly, I think that's probably the answer for most, like, all those great DC bands, why'd they break up? It's like the people, it's like when you're younger, it's just such a volatile age, between whatever, 17 and 25 is just like a super volatile age. And you get older and then bands learn how to like, oh, I get it. If I put up with their bullshit, they'll put up with my bullshit. I get how it works.
Oh yeah, we don't have to have catharsis all the time, don't we? Okay, all right.
Maybe he's right. Maybe sometimes I'm full of shit too. Yeah, maybe he's got something to that. Yeah.
Well, and then that sort of kind of move forward the iconic Girls Against Boys sound, right? It's somewhat bass heavy. There's electronics that come in. And again, that's 92, 93, somewhere around that neighborhood, right? And there's a lot of exciting bands that are happening. The weirdos are getting let in to a certain degree around that same time. Like it's like right during the gold rush to a certain degree, as I think of evidence on this show. Who did you feel like was the band's contemporaries around that time? What other bands were
Girls Against Boys in the early Girls Against Boys days? Well, Fugazi, we didn't tour with them a lot. We toured with them a little bit. We did a nice really early on, did a string of dates with them in Europe. But regardless of playing with them or not playing with them, they were always, close friends, and also just musically both inspiring and also challenging, but then but then we were on Touch and Go. So we got introduced to not just Touch and Go bands, but also bands, more like Midwest sound and also just bands. Anyway, our horizons were broadened. And so of course, the Jesus Lizard was, or I'm talking about bands maybe that we aspire to be contemporaries of.
Sure.
But we toured extensively with the Jesus Lizard. They took us under their drunken wing, and they were hugely influential. Brainiac, of course, was like our sibling band, and we probably played more shows with Brainiac than any other band, I'm guessing, and a bunch of others, Jawbox, L7 we did a show with, and they felt like we didn't know them, but they felt like friends. And lots of, tons of bands.
Did you feel like with that record and with those songs at that time and with everyone kind of, dealing with things like adults rather than dealing with things like
that far.
Did you feel like, hey, we got something we can kind of build on here? We got some stuff we can explore, or was it even that academic? Was it just more this is water as far as what you were doing that was be the lead up to what happens next?
Yeah, no, I think definitely there's avenues we can explore. I mean, it's like that's what when you connect with people musically, it's super exciting because it's like it feels like what can't we do if we're in sync with each other, and we got super in sync with each other, particularly musically, and so we had we put out a bunch of records, and we're always trying to. We had a sound, but we're always trying to, of course, push our sound in new, what we're doing in new directions, and that was always a challenge. But specifically for like when Venus Lux was coming out, when we hadn't put out that much. Theoretically, that was our second album, and we had another EP, but it was our first album, as we've been discussing, since we sort of stumbled, really started to figure out what was distinctly Girls Against Boys.
Coalescing. He kind of had a more defined existence rather than, that makes sense.
And so, there was, and Eli's studio chops continued to get better and better. So that was something that we had as a band, is like the ability to record ourselves. Not that we did that a whole lot, but it was, just having that in your arsenal. And Eli was always involved with recordings, but it wasn't like we wrote songs in a studio setting. That's not what I'm suggesting. But
it's obviously the man's got skills, right? So it's the band is going to benefit from having those, are going to be able to try out stuff and do some cool things. Well, and it just occurs to me too that even from especially from that record on, like there's ostensibly, whether anyone agrees the genre tag applies or not, the noise rock world doesn't have a lot of style to it usually. Like usually the style for whatever reason got defined as like this quote unquote anti-style and more like, for lack of a better term, proletariat. But Girls Against Boys was able to kind of hold the panache of the noise, but kind of make it cool too. Everything was like a cool movie even before it was in movies. And I mean, that's another hard beam to stay upright on. You can go one way, an inch too far over here, it becomes something else. Inch too far over here becomes something else. Was that something that ever was in the game plan or at all, or is that just how you guys roll?
I think it's just how we roll. And I mean, to be quite honest, like I never fully rolled that way. So I was like on a style level, I was kind of along for the ride. And, I learned along the way, like, I can wear black, like I like wearing black and like, so I wear like I could have either like a black t-shirt, like seriously, or like a black button-up shirt. But, generally for like a gig or something, I'm more likely to wear a t-shirt. But I got a black t-shirt. I got some cool black pants, not like $100 black pants, but a cool $40 pair. black pants, and then like I wear Doc Martens, so that right there is basically a summation of my entirety of rock and roll style. So if you're going to credit Girls Against Boys with having style and panache, you're going to have to, our viewers and listeners are going to have to go to a different podcast. But I happen to be in a band with some very sexy men, and with that, who had a bit of style, Scott, Eli, Alexis, those are styling guys. And honestly, you put me in black, my t-shirt, my pants, my shoes, and I don't stand out, it's like I can.
Yeah. I think it's a little better than that, but I get the vibes. So changing gears a little bit, like let's move forward to Cruise Yourself. Did you have any idea that Sexplayer was going to kind of hit the way that it did? Because sometimes some songs you just know. You play that was one where you just knew. I mean, and I've been thinking about that song a lot lately, because at the beginning of the song Kill the Sexplayer, when Scott starts talking, his sort of intro to the song, I mean, the whole song is sort of a conversation. It is.
And maybe it's not right to separate the intro, but anyway, his opening salvo and salvos, in the first minute of that song are so inspired, and it's like when he laid down that vocal track, I remember listening to it going, who's not going to love this? Like, that's like the coolest fucking vocal thing ever. And all he's doing is talking, but it's like, the panache, talk about panache. I mean, I just, that was super exciting when Scott laid down, I think we had like together written, a good, really driving rhythmic song, but then Scott, totally took it over the top with his vocals, they're just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's like one part film noir, one part like Velvet Underground, Lou Reed observational, and but then those self-referential, but not in a way that is debilitatingly so. Like it works, and it's certainly a song that gets the attention too. It's got a pulse, it's got a rhythm. I think back to y'all playing it on the Jon Stewart show, again, pre-Daily Show, the Jon Stewart show, where he would have kind of cool bands play, and just being like, wow, they let this on TV. Crazy. I mean, and did you find that people like responded to that one as not that it's the Girls Against Boys Freebird or anything, but that people found a response to it that was like, oh man, this is hitting.
Yeah, because it was really like, in terms of like, okay, Venus Lux, and then that song in like Flynn, which opens the record, where when Scott says, "Come down to my level, I want to talk to you," which is like the way, but if you don't know Girls Against Boys, you have to listen to it because it sounds very different than when I say it. But it was this invitation, this conversational invitation into our world, to the house of GvsB, and so Cruise Yourself. I mean, and Kill the Sexplayer is like, it's just, to me, it does feel like a marker, but it's very similar tone-wise for Scott. And what was exciting about that song is similar to what's exciting about In Like Flynn. So Kill the Sexplayer is like, 18 months later, it's like, the plot has thickened. But it really, and I don't mean to be sitting here saying my band is the greatest band in the world. Or, I hope it doesn't sound like I'm patting myself on the back. I'm not saying Girls Against Boys is the greatest rock band ever, but there are, there's definitely, I do love Girls Against Boys, but there's certain songs I've been thinking a lot, as I said, about Kill the Sexplayer lately, and I'm really, proud of that song and proud of Scott. It's all of us together, but his performance is just so great.
There's such a comfortable identity to it too, and it's one of the few songs I can think of, from that era, that genre, whatever the genre would happen to be, that also like it would feel good at a party. And it's like it wouldn't seem like jarring in a bad way. It'd be jarring in a good way. Oh, what's this? Rather than like, oh my God, what's this?
Yeah.
Only for those only transcriptions. And it's something that, again, there just isn't a lot of. And it occurred to me also, when I was mentioning it being, a stylish band, it's also that Girls Against Boys was a co-ed affair. It wasn't dudes rock. There certainly were dudes rocking, but it wasn't just dudes rock. And by that I mean that in a genre that tends to be somewhat not inclusive at times, it seemed like there was an easy path in with Girls Against Boys that maybe didn't exist in other bands. Again, coming out from the outside, and a welcome one at that. And again, a defined identity. Like, it seemed like you were guys that knew who you were as a band and as players, and had a voice. And that's not really a question. That's more of an observation. But it seemed like you really dug in on that one. Like that whole set of songs, it just seemed really just, this is Chinatown or something, where it's hitting everywhere it should.
Yeah. Well,
maybe with less of a depressing ending, but So, I mean, but did it feel any different on the inside? Was that something where you just doing the work? And obviously you say you were thinking about some of the songs, and sometimes that can be like, why is this special? Like, why does this pop in this way and this thing doesn't? And sometimes you can spend an entire lifetime analyzing. I think this whole show is spent analyzing that at this point. And the answer sometimes is, it just is. It's not.
I don't even quite understand your question.
Well, what I'm getting at is that, on the inside level of playing in the band at that time, did it feel like you were hitting on all cylinders? Did it really feel like, yeah?
I mean, it didn't feel like we had nailed everything we want to nail. It didn't feel like we had gotten to where we can go, but that's why we wanted to go further. We wanted to get where we could go. It felt like, yeah. But also our audience immediately started to grow when we put out Venus Lux and then Cruise Yourself. We suddenly got, our music was connecting, with more people. There's a lot of people that, didn't really care for Tropic of Scorpio. Or I'm not saying it was criticized. I'm just saying it didn't catch people's attention.
It didn't
the way Venus Lux did, and then Cruise Yourself. And so that was very exciting, is that our music was getting better to ourselves and to our audience. And that felt clear, so that was, when your audience is growing, we didn't have huge audiences, but it was growing, and that was exciting.
So then again, and I kind of posit this question to anyone that existed during the 90s, again, that rare time period where the freaks were let in, even if only briefly. There was a lot of bands that were platformed and given opportunities that, in all likelihood, defy logic and defy any kind of commercial, non-fever dream outcomes. But it seemed like Girls Against Boys was a pretty safe bet as far as what you guys were doing. There was stability. It didn't seem like there was Butthole Surfers style hijinks going on. You had a record of success. Again, as you mentioned, a clear growth pattern. So then you go into the House of Girls Against Boys, GvsB, you see Vs versus Girls, whatever. You know what I mean? GvsB, yeah. It seems like you're just continuing a winning streak. You're doing the thing. You got Disco 666 on there. You got a bunch of other tunes. Kind of seemed like the sustainable touch and go model of just putting out cool stuff and you're continuing it forward, but not necessarily taking that big bite at the apple for the bigger thing at that point. Would you say that's a correct assessment as far as from the inside at that point? That would have been 95, 96, I think, somewhere around that time period. What was going on when the band around that time? Where was everybody at?
Well, we actually, all the major label interest in us happened after Cruise Yourself. So we actually signed our contract with Geffen Records in, I think it was 95. It was either 95 or 96. But the most important thing, right, in terms of what I'm saying now, is that we hadn't even, I don't think, recorded House of GvsB.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when we signed with Geffen, they didn't get our next record. We signed a deal where they had to wait a record.
They had to get the one after that. Oh,
Yeah.
fascinating. Okay. So
Yeah. So we put out House of GvsB on Touch and Go. So that whole time we were already entering, we already had a foot in the major label world, you know, and the people at Geffen, the publicists at Geffen were like looking out for us, you know, and help planting seeds with journalists because, you know, we were being, I wouldn't say we were being groomed because we were on Touch and Go had no interest in grooming us for a major label, but they had, but Touch and Go had been, grooming is the wrong word with an independent, but they had been nurturing us, and they continue to, you know, but then it was the sequence of it was very weird because it was a little bit strange to be like, we're a Geffen band putting out our last record on Touch and Go.
Yeah. I mean, what was the mindset there of just, we want to continue on with Corey and like with this family, like for one more, and then kind of figure out after that, or like,
yeah,
what was
our plan with Corey had been to do 3 records together. Okay. And, you know, I think that was like a verbal understanding, and we wanted to honor it. And we also weren't like, we were eager to take advantage of the major label interest in it and the money that they were going to pay us. You know, that was a big part of what was going on. And, you know, because it wasn't until we signed with Geffen that we had the members of the band could afford health insurance, you know?
Right. Like
we were like pretty high up in the sort of indie rock world. Like we were doing really well, you know, but couldn't quite afford health insurance. And that's fine. You know, like music doesn't have to buy your health insurance, but it's just, you know, I'm making a point here. So yeah. So
having those resources helped you as people and in your lives.
Having the resource of health insurance helps you as a person so that if you're sick, you can go to the doctor.
Yeah, the resource of, yes.
Exactly. The resource of health insurance, you know, is so fucked up. Health insurance is still so incredibly fucked up. Although Biden is already making positive steps in the health insurance world.
We'll see. There's hope yet. as far as that goes. So then, all right. So let's talk about Freak on Ica. Which I thought was Freak on Ica for a long time, and then I heard it said aloud. I'm like, oh, like electronica, right? But talk about that record. So what was the mindset at that time? You obviously wanted to have you taking the fact you had a bigger budget, you had promotional opportunities maybe that didn't exist before, but there always were electronic elements to what that band did. Was the idea to kind of dig more into that, or was it just kind of like, hey, we're going to do more? Like, what was the? Yeah,
we were trying to do more, and continuing to do interesting stuff on the electronic side of things. We were touring a fair bit with like a live DJ, you know, scratching this. He was just a teenager. My friend Jamin Gilbert, and he was like 16 maybe. So we had like a 16-year-old DJ traveling with us, which was kind of cool. I was friends with his whole family, including his parents. So, so that's, but I think it was like a common story of like a band having a little bit too big of a recording budget and spending a little too much time in the studio. So that I think that record got overthought and overproduced. And maybe it didn't have to be that way, but there was no one making us do it. It was what we as a band decided to do. But I think it was in some ways, you know, it wasn't as successful a record from an artistic standpoint as the 3 records before it. And part of it, I think, was, you know, having a little bit too much time to, you know, not having enough urgency in the studio. But I think like the songs would have been the same songs. Like if that record had been on Touch and Go, I don't think our songwriting would have been different, but the recording, this is my theory, at least. I don't know what my bandmates would think of this theory, but I think that probably the songs would have been the songs. They just wouldn't have been over thought out.
Sure. And do you think there was sort of a loss of a focus with kind of knowing when something is done? Because again, you mentioned like the overthinking things in the studio. That is a kind of a common thing that
it's that too. But yeah, we decided to bring on a producer, Nick Launay, and he's a great guy and a great producer.
Yeah.
But it was also his influence. And he had a very positive influence. He was very open-minded, but I think it was like artistically, the stars didn't kind of line up right. Because Nick had a pretty good vision. Maybe we just didn't quite rise to his vision or something. I'm not sure what it was. And I don't mean to diss the record. I think there's things on that record that songs certainly that we all love, and Park Avenue is I think is a really good song and stuff. I just think it's not as, we weren't as, it's not as organic a recording.
Well, and it doesn't, it didn't hit quite the same. It hit a little differently, and that seemed to be intentional. And sometimes you take a swing and it connects.
Yeah, we were trying to do something new, and we were trying to, sometimes, you don't always, not all, but you have to experiment. As a musician, you just have to. And sometimes your experiments don't pan out as well as other times. But it's predictable that the experiment with the major label involves a big recording budget.
Yeah, and that's it. So then, and what's fascinating to me is I'm actually a big fan of "You Can't Fight What You Can't See." I think that record's really great, but it kind of seems like, maybe this is from the outside, but like that was a pretty good length of time between there. Was there any kind of like what all happened in between those records? Like what? Because
we got sort of trapped in major label apathy land. Yeah. Which happens to lots of bands. Maybe I don't know if it still happens to bands, but it was happening a lot those days, where the label has you, but they're not sure what to do with you. And so that happened. So we had to kind of like legal our way out back to our freedom is what happened. We did it well. I mean, yeah. It was a bad, there was like a bummer period, just again, because of the cynicism that, it sucks to, when you make music, you don't want to be leading from a point of cynicism.
Rock and roll lawyers. Yeah, exactly.
But we did have some funny experiences during that period of trying to liberate ourselves. But we managed to liberate, and we got paid to liberate ourselves, which was even better. Because when we signed, I will say, we got a great record deal, and it didn't pan out well in terms of like our career and stuff. But on like a financial level, we got it. I think we played our cards right, and I'm proud of that. And that's how I was able to start my book publishing company, which was with money I made largely from Geffen Records. And so that is one thing that was positive out of it, is that we all, I don't, now I'm like bringing it up again.
Well, yeah, but
I don't mean to gloat. I mean, there wouldn't be, I wouldn't have a book publishing company without it,
No, there's nothing wrong with, taking coal and making diamonds out of it. Right. Like there's nothing wrong with that at all. And it may not be everyone's story, but I think that's just as important as to give like the big bad wolf parable of the major label and whatever else. Like it's sort of like it is just one story. There's complications and nuance. And I think you have one of the more interesting, I don't know if you call it a second act, like that always sounds kind of demeaning to me.
Yeah.
But fascinating. Absolutely fascinating to me that you're able to do it, and like do it really well too. And I think that can be inspiring for folks as well. Whether they're continuing to play music or not, is to know that you can stay engaged and you can do cool stuff, even if you have what would be completely devastating experiences on some level. Anyway, can you tell, just, I know, and I want to be mindful of your time, but I do like You Can't Fight What You Can't See record quite a bit. Can you just tell us a little bit about, Reconvening, and kind of, did you have it in mind that you're like, okay, this one's going to be a little meaner? This one's good.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we definitely knew we wanted to strip it back down. And that's what we did, and we had like some songs we had written to make a demo for Geffen, when they were trying to decide what to do with us. And so we we recorded some songs. This is where we're at. And they're like, we still don't know what to do with you. Those 4 songs don't really help.
We still don't know what to do with you. Yeah.
And so that's when we started to try to liberate ourselves. And then once we did, we took those, I guess maybe we had been writing other songs too. And then we just built the album around, I think, those first 4 songs.
Yeah. And there's there's an intensity to it. And it's something where, as a band that was somewhat iconoclastic, like you guys had your own sound, it wasn't, and again, I think it seemed more pronounced at the time for the Freakonica record to seem like sort of like an outlier. Like, I don't think it feels as much like it now, but at the time I was like, whoa, are they doing 9 Inch Nails or something? Of course that's not even remotely true, but if you listen now, it's like, oh, that's fine. It's just find some other stuff. But again, things were just processed. Yeah. We didn't have social media the way we do. We didn't have, et cetera, ad infinitum.
The world would have been so much better back then if we'd had social media. Think of how great things would have been.
Can you imagine? Oh my God. Where's that dystopian lit?
Yeah, that's right. That's a good dystopian novel idea. The internet comes earlier.
Yeah, it comes 20 years earlier.
Starts fucking things up even earlier.
Fantastic. But don't worry, there's already a million podcasts about Bill Clinton. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, that's why I said dystopian. But it's like, it's not that it's a mean record, but it's like it's a gritty record. There's a lot of there is a little dirt on it in a good way, and I think that's something that it's not like there needed to be a postscript to the story, or an epilogue, if you will, since you're a bookman. But it's nice that you were able to do that and be like, no, this is what we are. We're this thing. We write these songs and we do this stuff. And maybe you forgot, but that's okay. We're going to remind you now.
Yeah. Because time is getting short for me, there are a few can I say a few related things about Girls Against Boys?
Please do. Thank you.
Is that there will be soon to be announced is a 25th anniversary reissue of House of GvsB with an exciting additional element, which I won't talk about because we haven't announced it yet. And I will also say that there is the possibility of more dirty new Girls Against Boys recordings. So you can't fight what you can't see is in no way an epilogue.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, because there's we've been playing around a bit, virtually with one another, and there's some potentially very feisty things afoot.
Didn't you play like a show in Prague or something, right?
Yes.
Like how was that? I mean, that was like,
it was incredible. It was one of the best shows we ever played. It was so good. It was Scott's 50th birthday party, and it was like 4 of Scott's bands played one after another.
Oh, fantastic.
Maybe it ended up just being 3. Paramount Styles opened the show, then Soulside played, and then Girls Against Boys played. And it was just like this big packed club, sold out club in Prague. And we flew in 4 days early to rehearse and hang out. And it was just the greatest time.
Yeah, and that sounds like that'd be okay. Yeah.
We played, most importantly, it all comes down from the fact that we actually played really well. And that was the best thing about it, is that we played well, but that opened it up for other, the social side of things. Because if you can hang out all you want, but if you get up there and you soccer, don't really come through, it's not going to be that exciting of a memory.
Well, sure, absolutely, and that's also exciting because I mean, there's a whole new generation of people that never experienced a band in the first place. That maybe they like the records, they got turned on to it, and because of X, Y, and Z. But just the chance that there's going to be, a reissue and therefore more attention towards one of the iconic records, and like the possibility maybe for other things. That's great news indeed. I'm very glad to hear it. Personally, I'm glad to hear it. I'm also glad that you broke the news on the show, but personally, I hear it also. So, all right, Johnny, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been lovely, and I really appreciate the time. There is one canned question that I always ask folks at the end. Choose to interpret it however you like, but why do you do what you do?
I think I'm so fortunate and lucky and privileged to do what I do. So I feel like I do what I do because I was dealt a fortunate hand. I had I had and have great parents, and then along the way, I was super fortunate to get involved in music. First working with Bobby Sullivan from Soulside at a reggae record label, and then through Bobby, who connected me to punk rock. Like part of reason why I do what I do is because of my dear friend Bobby Sullivan, who, not that he entirely introduced me, but it was a lot through him that I got pulled into, like, not just being like a fan of music, but like having like a musical lifestyle and really becoming a musician. And so and to wrap this up, I'm not religious, I'm an atheist, and art is kind of my God, and I feel really fortunate to have art in my life, literature, music first and foremost, and also very much like literature. So to be able to work in a world that to me is like, elevated music to me is, when it's good music, is elevated consciousness, or is just humans sort of stepping out of their body. I don't mean in any kind of religious or woo-woo sense. That's not what I'm saying. I don't, I'm an atheist. So, but I, it's like, I really realized that during COVID, more and obviously I've loved art my whole life, but during COVID, I felt more and more essentially in love with music, essentially in love with great writing. And then the fortunate situation that I was born into, and then meeting the right people along the way, allowed me to not just appreciate art, but be a part of helping make music and make books.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for it. And thanks for being on the show. It's been great talking.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate it.
Take care, brother.
All right. Bye-bye.
There he goes. Johnny Temple. Girls Against Boys. What a cool guy. Akashic Books, a.k.a. SHICBOOKS.com, or on your various social medias as you feel so inclined. Girls Against Boys is all over the place. We didn't even talk about fake names. Damn it. Oh, that's on me. All right. Well, what I'm going to do. Say what we're going to do. Let's listen to some music. Let's listen to, what do you think I'm going to play? Let's Kill This Noise.
This song is so hip right now, I'm going deaf. I want to kill this singer.
and like Flynn, Girls Against Boys. Before that, we had. Come on, what do you think we had? Kill the Sexplayer, Girls Against Boys. I think that's an obvious choice, but.
Is this thing on?
Man, what ripper songs! What a great band! What a great band! That was awesome. Johnny's great. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Again, as I mentioned, Akashic Books, AKASHIC. Go check them out. Go read something, dummy. AkashicBooks.com. Exciting pseudo-breaking news once again on Protonic Reversal. Excited for the possibility of some new Girls Against Boys news, and certainly a reissue of a pretty killer record that I did not play a song from, did I? Well, that's fine. Hey, so name of this show is Conan Neutron's Protonic Reversal. Thank you very much for listening to it. This show airs on Radio Nope, Thursdays, 8 Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, 5 Pacific. Say yes to Nope. Archives at protonicreversal.com. Always free.
Signing off.
No ads, no sponsors, no kidding.
Mr. and Mrs. America, all ships at sea.
If you do like the show, want to support it, and or get episodes sooner, $1 a month. Patreon.com/Protonic Reversal will make that very achievable dream happen.
50,000 watts of power.
Thanks to everyone for subscribing to both the podcast, to the YouTube, all the things, spreading the shows around, reviews, likes, comments, all that stuff. It may seem absurd, and it is, but it helps the show, and I appreciate it.
This microphone turns sound into electricity.
Just like I appreciate you listening to this show. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me now?
Stay safe out there.
Out on Route 128, you're dark and lonely.
And take it easy.
Got my radio on. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Welcome to my top 10. I'd like to thank our sponsor. But we haven't got a sponsor. Not if you were the last man on Earth. She was prepared to prove it. This one goes out to a special girl. But there is no special girl. It's the end of radio. The last announcer plays the last record. The last what? Leaves the transmitter. circles the globe in search of a listener. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Is it really broadcasting if there's no one there to receive? It's the end of radio. As we come to the close of our broadcast day, got my radio